As we continue on the UN Climate Summit, representatives of over 40 nations have pledged to end the use of coal power. The deal, announced at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, did not include many of the largest coal producers, including China, India, Australia, and the United States. To talk more about the state of the climate summit, we're joined by Meena Raman. She's head of programs at Third World Network, usually based in Penang, Malaysia, now joining us from Glasgow. Behind her, the rotating globe that's suspended over the UN Climate Assembly. Meena Raman, talk about the significance of these 40 countries committing to ending the use of coal, but the major users from the United States to China refusing to participate in this.
Well, Amy, I think what we need to recognize is that all these sideline pledges or announcements actually need to be reflected in the real commitments which are under the convention and the Paris Agreement. A lot of these announcements are all outside of that process. So, of course, I don't think you can put the US on the same level as China and India, because the US is a much bigger historical emitter than China or India. And China and India, and I've said constantly previously before, they do have huge challenges because of large emissions coming because of large populations. So in terms of per capita, US is still much higher than China and India. So the point I'm making is that you can't say put them on the same platform together. And the second point I'd like to make also is that what's critical is to recognize the energy poverty that many of these, the developing countries face. So we do need to phase out from fossil fuels, but what's fundamental is that there has to be on the basis of what's called just transition. So that the people who are energy poor, the more that they have access to renewable energy, the more that we ensure that they are not the victims of climate solutions. So having said that, I do think that all countries need to do much more, not just on coal, but fossil fuels as a whole. But the developing world does require large amounts of financing, large amounts of technology transfer for the kind of transformation that needs to happen. When the rich world has not been able to phase out fossil fuels, which it ought to have done by today, and yet it continues to expand the use of fossil fuels, it's really dubious to preach to the developing world that that they have to get out of fossil fuels. So the leaders, and this is recognized by the treaty itself, the Convention and the Paris Agreement, those with the greatest responsibility, historical emissions and current cumulative emissions together, they have a huge responsibility for the current warming. And this has been pointed out also by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in relation to the large amounts of CO2 which have been emitted, which are causing much of the impacts that we face today.
Can you explain the 1.8 degree Celsius that now is being put out as the goal?
No, it's 1.5, it's not 1.8. If you recall in Paris, the agreement in the Paris basically says that countries will ensure that the global temperature goal will be limited to well below 2 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial levels, and they will pursue towards 1.5 degree centigrade. Now, we all know as climate justice groups that the 1.5 is a much safer guardrail. But the issue really here is that when particularly the rich world talks about we need to achieve the 1.5 degree limit, the devil really is in the detail of how to get there. Now, when you have a 1.5 degree limit compared to a 2 degree limit, the amount of carbon space or the atmospheric space that you have left is much smaller than under a 2 degree limit. So the issue really is that, as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has pointed out, if you add all the emissions from the historical and you take the cumulative into account, we only have something like 500 gigatons of carbon space left. This means that at the current emission trends, we will exhaust this carbon budget for limiting temperature rise to 1.5 on with a 50% chance, and that itself is a problem. So
let me clarify something, Meena.
This 500 gig.
The number has always been 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And scientists have said that global warming must be kept to this above pre-industrial levels. But I thought what has come out now is that the International Energy Agency reported Thursday that warming could be limited to 1.8 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2100.
Yeah, they were referring to the methane and other initiatives and cooling and so on, and they have come to 1.8. Now, I have not seen the details of the report, but I think that what we need to recognize, Amy, is the fact that whether it's 1.8 or 1.5 or even 2 degrees, with the push for net zero by 2050 by all countries, and this is being pushed right from the UN top level right down to the UK presidency, we in civil society in the climate justice movement are very critical of that, because it is about, if you look at US saying net zero by 2050 and other developed countries saying net zero by 2050, and if you look at the content of that, that's actually doing too little too late. And net zero will exhaust with the net zero distant targets of 2050, there is no time for 2050. And you actually need to get to real zero today. It actually should have been done yesterday, by the rich world in particular. So we need to recognize the fact that we are not going to be able to limit temperature rise either to 1.8 or 1.5 or even 2 degrees if we allow the rich nations to keep to net zero by 2050. This is too little, too late. And net zero, what it actually means is that you don't decarbonize. Every ton of carbon that you emit, you're going to plant a tree to absorb that carbon. It doesn't work that way. Science does not work that way. So we are being told about these net zero targets, and it's an illusion. It's really a complete illusion. And we are very worried that there is a lot of greenwashing which is happening here. A lot of it is about, if you look at the targets, they talk about what you call it, carbon credits, offsetting. Offsetting, it's not about decarbonizing. Decarbonizing means you remove emissions and you also plant trees to increase the things. But what's happening here is that net zero through carbon offsets, which means that the developing world will have to do much more of the heavy lifting again. And this doesn't work. It's the time for carbon offsets is over.
I want to get your comment on the first week of the talks, and of course we'll be with Glasgow all next week. President Biden came, he was one of the openers of the UN Climate Summit, but right before he came to Glasgow, he was in Rome at the G20 summit, and he held a news conference when he was asked about his call for the world's largest oil producers to increase output. This is what he said.
You also met with energy consumers about supply. What steps are you considering taking if OPEC Plus does not raise supply? And do you see any irony in pushing them to increase oil production at the same time that you're going to COP26 to urge people to lower emissions?
Well, on the surface, it seems like an irony, but the truth of the matter is, you've all known, everyone knows, that the idea we're going to be able to move to renewable energy overnight and not have, from this moment on, not use oil or not use gas or not use hydrogen is just not rational.
Meena Raman, if you could respond to what Biden said.
Well, his response is completely irrational, and it really is about the hypocrisy of world leaders like him coming to COP26 and saying that we need to do more. Now, if the rich world cannot get off their oil addiction, and if they cannot, it's not just about renewable energy. More importantly, it's also about consumption patterns and production systems. So the consumption, we can't be being oil addicts or fossil fuel addicts, actually. And so we do need to move. The transformation is phenomenal, but Biden has no excuse to say what he said.
I want to thank you so much, Meena Raman, for joining us, head of programs at Third World Network. She traveled to Glasgow from Penang, Malaysia.